When you think of mummies, you probably picture ancient Egypt, right? Pharaohs wrapped in linen, resting peacefully in golden tombs. But what if I told you about a different kind of mummy? Mummies that weren't prepared by priests, but created by the earth itself. Mummies that looked like they had woken up in their own graves, screaming. This is the chilling story of the Mummies of Guanajuato, a tale born from plague, poverty, and a horrifying mistake. Our story begins in 1833 in the city of Guanajuato, Mexico. A devastating cholera epidemic swept through the region. People were falling ill and dying with terrifying speed. The fear of contagion was so intense that the dead were buried almost immediately, sometimes within hours of being declared deceased. There was no time for traditional wakes or long goodbyes. The priority was to get the bodies underground as quickly as possible to stop the disease from spreading. This rush, born of panic and necessity, would have terrifying consequences that no one could have imagined at the time. The ground itself in the Santa Paula Pantheon Cemetery held a secret. The soil was incredibly dry and rich in minerals like sulfur. This unique environment didn't let the bodies decompose. Instead, it naturally desiccated them, preserving them in a state of mummification. For decades, these silent residents lay undisturbed, their stories buried with them. Then, decades later, in 1865, a strange new law was enacted. It was called the grave tax. Essentially, families had to pay a fee to keep their loved ones buried in the cemetery. If a family couldn't afford the tax for 3 years in a row, their relative would be exhumed to make room for someone new. This was a grim reality for many poor families in Guanajuato. The cemetery workers began the somber task of digging up the unpaid graves, but what they found was not what they expected. Instead of skeletons, they unearthed perfectly preserved bodies. These weren't peaceful, sleeping figures. Their faces were contorted in agony, their mouths agape as if in a silent scream. Their hands were often held up to their faces, their bodies twisted into unnatural positions. It was a chamber of horrors, a gallery of the dead who looked like they had been fighting to escape their own coffins. Among the first mummies discovered was a French doctor named Remigio Leroy. He was found sitting up in his coffin, his clothes still intact, his expression frozen in time. The cemetery workers, both horrified and fascinated, began storing these mummies in a nearby ossuary, a building meant for bones. Word quickly spread about the gruesome discovery, and locals started paying the workers a few pesos to see the mummified dead. This marked the humble and rather macabre beginning of what would eventually become the Museo de las Momias de Guanajuato, the Museum of the Mummies. As more and more bodies were exhumed, the collection grew, each mummy telling its own silent, terrifying story. But why did they look so distressed? This is where the story takes its darkest turn. The cholera epidemic of the 1830s was not just deadly. It was deceptive. The disease could induce a state that closely resembled death, a type of coma where the person's heartbeat and breathing would become so faint they were virtually undetectable. Remember how quickly people were being buried? It's just believed that a significant number of cholera victims were actually dead when they were put in the ground. They were in a deep, unresponsive coma. They were buried alive. Imagine the absolute terror. Waking up in complete darkness, enclosed in a narrow wooden box, 6 feet underground. The air is stale and running out. You scream, but no one can hear you. You claw at the lid of the coffin until your fingers are raw and bloody. You push and struggle, trying to turn over, to find a way out, but there is no escape. This horrifying scenario is believed to be the explanation for the mummy's tortured expressions and twisted postures. They weren't screaming at the moment of death, but in the moments after they were buried. One of the most famous and heartbreaking cases is that of Ignacia Aguilar. Her mummy was found with her arms covering her face, her head tilted back, and her mouth wide open. The story goes that Ignacia suffered from a heart condition that would cause her to faint and appear dead for short periods. Her family, tragically, had mistaken one of these episodes for her actual death during the cholera outbreak. When she was exhumed, they found her in a completely different position from how she was buried. She had turned over in her coffin. Her forehead was covered in scratches, and she had bitten her own arm, a desperate act of pain and panic. Her hands were clawed, as if she had spent her last moments trying to scratch her way out. Ignacia Aguilar likely woke up in her own grave and experienced the most terrifying death imaginable. Her story became a symbol of the horrors of premature burial. And she wasn't alone. Another mummy, a mother, was found with her tiny infant. The baby is considered the world's youngest mummy. The story passed down is that the mother, in her cholera-induced state, gave birth while in the coffin, or was buried with her living newborn. The postures of many other mummies tell a similar story of a desperate final struggle. Men and women, young and old, their final moments forever preserved by the unique chemistry of the Guanajuato soil. The chamber of horrors the workers uncovered wasn't just a collection of dead bodies. It was a testament to the final frantic moments of people who had been condemned to an unthinkable fate. Today, the Museum of the Mummies of Guanajuato houses over 100 of these natural mummies. They stand behind glass, their silent screams echoing through the halls. It's a deeply unsettling and powerful experience. Visitors come from all over the world to gaze upon these faces from the past. It's a stark reminder of a time when medicine was limited and fear ruled. The museum is not for the faint of heart. It's a direct confrontation with mortality and the fragility of life, but it's also a unique historical artifact. These mummies are not ancient royalty. They are ordinary people, miners, housewives, soldiers, and children whose lives were cut short by a plague and whose deaths were marked by a final, desperate struggle. Their legacy is a chilling lesson from history, a warning about the consequences of fear and haste. The mummies of Guanajuato didn't get to rest in peace. Instead, they remain as eternal witnesses to one of history's most terrifying medical nightmares, forever frozen in their final, silent scream. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the strange and mysterious corners of history. See you next time.